Welcome to the Fine Print, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Caleb Teskey, and today is maybe one of the most requested interviews that I've been getting from people. I got Grayson Glosser from X-Tract Vermont in Saint Albans. Grayson, thank you for joining me today, man.
Happy to be here. I'm surprised I was one of the most requested.
You and Tim Fair.
Huh. Well, I feel that's pretty cool.
No joke. So I'm glad to finally have you here. If you wouldn't mind, I like to start every guest with a 5-minute life story where you tell us a little bit about your background and where you're from and whatnot.
Yeah, so I'm from Vermont. I grew up in Barrie. That's just kind of where I grew up, and I went to school for chemistry at the University of Vermont. So I've kind of been here my whole life. And I was doing a lot of research and started doing a lot of work in organic optoelectronics, so thin film, solar cells and LEDs, like OLED TVs, the flexible ones. Doing that with solar cells, and I would make the components that would go into the actual solar cells, and then we'd actually make it. So I was a chemist and working with physicists, and it was a lot of fun, but I got a little tired of it. A lot of stuff was really, really toxic and flammable. And
oh, you mean like the chemicals you were working with?
Yeah, they were, it was in the name of renewable energy, but it was really, really dangerous.
Wow.
And that actually was not that big of a deal. It was actually kind of fun, especially on a smaller scale. You're only working with small quantities, so that adds an aspect to it. But I was also just not enjoying the work. And one day I'm looking for a job, and I wanted to stay in Vermont because I liked it, but in terms of technical experience, I'm like, okay, what can I do as a chemist? It's like, okay, there's a couple pharma companies, there's some plastics companies. I could go. Global Foundries is a very large semiconductor company.
Yep.
And I'm like, all right, wasn't exactly what I was going for. And then I saw ethanol extraction technician. So I went in and I interviewed, and I got the job, and that's where I've been ever since, is at X-Tract Vermont.
Where'd you find that? On Indeed or something?
On LinkedIn. They were putting out,
nice.
And it was a startup back then. We still kind of are.
How long ago was this?
This was 2020 in February.
Cool.
So, it started out as a family business. The owners, Selish, her husband he was a scientist, and he was trying to get into the hemp industry. He had a business that had fallen through that would have been another extraction lab. So he just wanted to bootstrap one. But then he actually died. So and he was a scientist, so they needed to find somebody, and that was me. So we came in, we only had a couple pieces of equipment, and I'm like, okay, I don't know a lot about how to do this stuff, but I'm sure I could figure it out. And then, so I came in, I got hired full-time pretty quickly. And that was about when, a month later, the pandemic started. So like, okay, well, these are my people now. So I started working full-time, and really just got into it, and had a lot of fun figuring out how to put stuff together, how to make the process work. We're doing ethanol extraction. I didn't know anything about it. So getting into that, the different impurities that get extracted, how to remove those, how to, and then it kind of just kept going from there. It kept snowballing. And it's like, oh yeah, it's like I bet I could, filling vape carts, like that's, having a dosed syringe gun, and how do we make that faster? And how do we pack pre-rolls and bottle tinctures? It's like, and it just kept going. And suddenly I kind of turn around now, and it's like, oh, we can actually do a lot of stuff now. And it just kind of has come from tinkering.
Has a lot changed in the last couple of years in terms of what you guys are able to do?
Yeah. And it's been a lot of fun. It's just been a lot of learning, and because there's not, you can't really Google how to, you can now somewhat, but it's like you can't really Google how to do cannabis because that's not, how to make a business out of it.
I was going to say the first thing we did when we got internet when we were kids in high school was look up how to grow weed. We would be in the library and I would keep a lookout for my homie and he would be back there printing stuff off in the basement.
Yeah, so I just kind of learning what I could. There are some good resources out there that are helpful for how to do this stuff. But yeah, that's kind of how I got started. So I'm a chemist by trade, but now it's my position now is chief scientific officer. So I manage the development, any new products, new processes is kind of something that goes through me, but I'm also managing most of the operations as well.
Nice.
Just because we're a small team. And
are you comfortable? You're a young buck now, Grayson. Are you comfortable taking on all that responsibility?
Yeah, I guess. A lot of times it's, in a sense, it's more that I know I can figure out how to do what I need to do. And there's no, I know that there's no excuses, there's no hiding, especially as a young person. It's a good way that it's something that holds you accountable. It's like, yeah, I'm a young person, so I better know my stuff. And it's not even really an insecurity thing. It's more of just, I want to do a good job. And, I also it's kind of nice to have, it's nice to have a younger perspective about stuff sometimes.
I agree.
But yeah, it is a lot of responsibility, but it's also a lot of fun.
How many people work in your lab there?
So right now, let's see, we have a kind of a fluctuating number of people because we have, the more administration and the leadership, and then we have the edibles stuff as well. So it's a team of like, the core team is 6, and then we have probably a couple extra employees and hands that are helping out here and there. So it's like between 10, but we're kind of having to hiring, and there is turnover with employees. And right now we're actually looking to hire a bunch of people because
I'm in.
Yeah, we put in our license 2 weeks ago.
Oh, you did get it in.
Yes.
I believe last time we spoke, you said you were still holding out, so that's good.
Yeah, well, the application hadn't opened yet.
Oh, right, correct.
Once
Okay.
it had, which was July 1st. So that's 2 weeks ago.
Gotcha. Yeah.
We had it in there on the first day. So we're looking for more people just because, there's only so much time.
And it seems like you guys have attracted a lot of business.
I mean, a lot of potential business because a lot of it's cannabis. I don't know if that was a gotcha kind of thing.
No, it seems like you got your reputation sort of precedes you here.
Well, I'm happy about that. It's been the hemp industry is really brutal. And it seems like it's just over time, it's more so, it's a more difficult market, especially when I started working. I remember it's like, yeah, CBD distillate, it was going for $2,000 to $3,000 per kilogram, and now maybe $250 per kilogram.
Damn.
Yeah,
just from 2 years ago, huh?
Yep. Wow. Yeah, 2.5. That's about where it's equilibrated, and that's just what happens with a artificially scarce commodity. Suddenly it's available and still scarce, but now people are starting to make it, and as it gets less and less scarce. And then I believe it was 2021, there was a very big glut of material, and that actually caused the market to really bottom out. And now it's risen a little bit from where it came from, maybe 6 months ago or something.
Interesting. So you said you do extract, you said you're doing some edibles over there. Are there any other like product lines you guys are working on for your clients or services that you offer?
I mean, we really just wanted to be a kind of one-stop shop for people. So we have the extraction part of it, which that's something that's a little more difficult for people to do at on the farm or something. It's hard to set up an ethanol extraction skid and have it be, with the fire safety and the, knowing how to actually process the stuff to not make a gross fish smelling distillate or something. I first couple rounds, they did not smell too pleasant, but sorry to stay on. So extraction is a big one, but then doing pre-rolls, vapes, and edibles is the really big one. And just being able to, it's like if somebody comes in, I want to be able to, it's like, what do you want? Tell me exactly what you want and I'll make it for you. And there's something that's kind of cool about that. It's a lot of fun to be able to do that.
So you guys don't have to worry about the growing end at all. You just take other people's stuff and you're turning it into magic, sort of.
Yeah. That's kind of what we're doing. And we're trying to focus on the core of stuff. Like we don't do a lot of topicals and cosmetic stuff. I'm well out of my depth with that. But keeping the the real core is the pre-rolls, vapes, edibles.
I wish you would maybe we could walk through the different types of extractions and the different types of products that come out on the other end, because that seems like, well, it seems like you're in the bomb closet there. I love that. That seems like a perfect room. But can we
that's the extraction area.
Is it? Okay, cool. This is the interview room, the interrogation room. Yeah, could we dive into some of that, please? Because I feel like it started with like dabs, whatever, wax, things like that, or hash, probably even before then. But I'm gonna let you handle that one because I
so it's kind of hard to classify it, because really, if we could kind of group these all together, because the goal of the concentrate is to basically take the THC or CBD and the terpenes and just concentrate them, getting rid of all the other stuff that's not that doesn't contribute taste or isn't a cannabinoid, so to speak. And there is kind of a blurry line, because there's some compounds that have an effect that like flavonoids or even some waxes, but it's not necessarily, that's not really at the core of it. And we could group it together like that, but a way that you can kind of classify them differently is how they're extracted. And that would be either by, you can kind of have the solvent process and then solventless processes. Solventless processes typically are things like hash, made with ice water, making bubble hash, or dry sift, and then that can further be pressed into something like rosin, which is a very sticky, tacky oil. And
so let me stop you for a second. To make the rosin, you basically just press the hash with some heat, right?
Correct. And then you have a 25 micron bag that you have to keep the plant material contained. And the reason you do that is because on the cannabis plant, there's these little trichome heads, as I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with. Basically, on the surface of, let's say, of the bud, there's this stem and a gland that holds all the terpenes and THC. Most of it, I shouldn't say all of it. And when you are making something like dry sift or hash, you're using mechanical force to snap those heads off, and then you're separating them using different micron screens or bags. And then that gives you a relatively pure product. Then you press it through a micron bag and you heat it to melt it. And that gives you, a rather pure product. If you're careful, and usually this is at the expense of yield, you can get something on the order of 80 to 90% THC, which is really impressive.
How much flour would you have to take to get like a gram of hash rosin? I know that's going to vary based on probably the THC content, but ballpark.
Yeah, if we say 20% by mass, if you're going the rosin, if you're just pressing a nub, let's say, you need about 4 grams or so, maybe 5, and that will yield you. But with hash rosin, you have a big yield loss initially, because you've removed, not all trichome heads are a lot of trichome heads are actually not suited for hash, a lot of strains. are not suited for making hash.
Really?
So that could be like maybe 10 grams or something.
Why are they not suited for making hash? Do you know?
This is kind of where it gets a little unscientific.
I don't mind if you speculate a little.
Yeah,
I'm just curious. I really don't know
some
either.
of it in the trichome stem, some of it is some cannabinoids and terpenes are deposited, and that doesn't necessarily break off as easily. There's some that's actually in the body itself. So if you look at just a potency test that you sent to a lab, it's not necessarily characteristic of the regions. It's just whatever you sent in. It's not like, oh, that it's most concentrated in the trichome head, but not necessarily.
Okay. So the distribution of it maybe plays a role in that.
Yeah. And especially with this mechanical process, that matters a lot because we're looking for a specific kind of shearing action to cleave the heads and possibly the stems off. Then you get into the solvent processes. And this is where this breaks down again. There's three main groups of solvent that people use. The one that I use is ethanol. This one is typically, although not always, it's typically disfavored by a lot of people who like really high-end dabs, because ethanol is very difficult to maintain the terpene profile and get all of the ethanol out, just because it's relatively high boiling solvent. It boils at 78 Celsius. Water boils at 100. So you're losing a lot of the lighter terpenes, and it's going to smell grassier. And it also can pull a lot of other impurities with it: chlorophyll, a lot of pigments, some waxes and oils, proteins, sugar, stuff that you don't want, where if you were to dab it, it might burn or might be really harsh. You can do a good job. That's actually what that's been kind of my holy grail over the last 2 years, is making a really good ethanol dab. But the main way that ethanol is used is making what's called distillate, which is basically taking that extract, processing it, and then running it through a short path distillation and actually distilling the cannabinoids like you would alcohol, except at a higher temperature and a deep vacuum. And that gives you a really nice, clear looking oil. This is what goes into vape carts typically, is distillate. And most of the time terpenes will be added back into this just to give it some flavor, because it's a pretty neutral tasting thing. Although if you don't do a good job, this is where things start to taste like fish.
How do you, I was going to say, because some of these vape carts I've tried, they're like, hey, this one tastes like fucking Sour Patch Kids, and this one tastes like Skittles, and it kind of does. It's like, is that when you add the terpenes back in to the distillate?
Yes. So I mean, this is kind of where it depends on what you're trying to do. What kind of product are you trying to make? If you're trying to make a vape cart, let's say you have a crude extract made with either ethanol or another solvent, and you were to separate the terpenes somehow and purify them, and then run your, because distillate the terpenes are usually destroyed if they go through the distillation process.
Wow.
And that's what smells like fish, is the degraded terpenes.
Oh.
It's unpleasant. It's wholly unpleasant. I almost think it's punishment, where it's like, how could you destroy something so sacred?
You deserve this.
you kind of do. But you can either separate them out, or a lot of people do botanically blended terpenes. So cannabis has a very wide variety of terpenes, and the blends is what gives it the certain smells. But you can approximate that with different terpenes. So limonene, you can derive it from lemons, and linalool from lavender, myrcene from hops, carpholine from pepper. Most terpene companies that I've seen on the market will do about 13 terpenes. And terpenes is more of a general term. There's a lot of other, that's a class of molecules, but there's other classes of molecules that get thrown in there, like esters and maybe flavonoids or something. But they only do about 13, and your nose is actually, and your taste buds are very sensitive. So you can kind of tell it's almost artificial. It's like an artificial flavoring. The most high resolution company I've seen, they did 92. They do 92 terpenes for a specific blend, which is impressive, but still probably doesn't quite approximate what.
Well, you can buy these terpene different concoctions from companies and add them to your distillates or your vape cart. Okay. I just wanted
that's kind of the main, that's what ethanol is being used for currently. But there's weird stuff that happens in the industry. The next one is CO2. CO2 is a really common one that I think a lot of people prefer. So supercritical CO2, basically you compress CO2 gas until it becomes this, basically a supercritical fluid is a weird hybrid of a liquid and a gas where it's able to flow and dissolve like a liquid, but it has the same surface tension and diffusivity of a gas, which is kind of an interesting property. So you get CO2 up to 71 atmospheres of pressure at 31 Celsius, and you have supercritical CO2. And that's useful for a lot of times. What people will do with those extracts is first they'll do a subcritical run. So they'll lower the pressure, the temperature, and they'll remove the terpenes first, because the terpenes will typically you can pull them off at subcritical parameters, and then you increase it to supercritical parameters to extract the cannabinoids. And that makes a really flavorful oil. There are some drawbacks to it that can be overcome as well. So there's a lot of times it pulls a lot of wax. I've seen some CO2 oils before, like they're 25% wax.
and so then you're going to have problems with the flow, maybe, if you put it in a vape cart.
Yeah, it'll probably it'll clog, or because the waxes aren't necessarily, they may not combust, or they may not vaporize, so they start to just clog. And a lot of times it's dark, not always, but it's and that's been changing as the technology gets more and more looked at. The other main drawback is the time it takes to process. Typically you do, and the fact that it just doesn't scale that well. Like 5,000 PSI, it's a lot of pressure. And typically you have to let it soak. You use small, maybe 5-pound batches, and they take about 8 hours, which that's a really long time. In a 5-pound extraction kit. Whereas with ethanol, you can do a 5-pound batch in 10 minutes. Wow. Yeah, because ethanol is a good solvent, meaning it holds a lot and it extracts quickly. You don't have to.
So why even bother with the time difference? What's the big advantage? The flavor.
People really like the flavor, and it makes a big difference. If you've ever had real proper.
Well, it's like maple syrup, right? If you make Aunt Jemima's with 2% sugar content, or if you cook it down, something like that.
Yeah, it's very similar to that. You can taste the difference, and it depends on what you like, and it depends on what you're going for. I don't really have a preference for any particular extraction method. I obviously have the one that I do, but that's also kind of built upon what was already here. And then the last main solvent that gets used is butane, and this is the big one. People have been using butane and open blasting for a long time now. Was that a guilty look?
No. I've seen a couple of close calls.
Yeah.
I know how weird it gets. I've definitely seen just a giant fireball of butane in a trailer doing an extraction.
So. Scares me. So for people who don't know what open blasting is, butane is a flammable gas. If you know what propane is, molecularly speaking, add another carbon onto it, and you have butane instead of propane. And it's also a gas. It has very favorable properties for extracting cannabinoids specifically, and terpenes. And what people used to do is they'd go to the store and get the butane tanks for refilling a creme brulee torch or something, and then they'd just have a container that they would then put the gas tip into, and the butane would flow through it and extract the cannabinoids out. The problem is butane is a flammable gas, and it's a gas, which means that any spark will cause it to ignite and explode. So it's
like a ceiling fan or
a ceiling fan, your cell phone,
a cell phone. Wow.
Cell phones. A spark on the, friction and the static shock if it's too dry. Pretty much any electrical spark would cause that to happen. Now, a lot of people just use, there's something called a closed loop extraction system, which is just, a sealed system where butane can be pumped and recovered from the actual extract.
Right, it's got a recapture machine.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
A lot safer. It follows the National Fire Protection.
How much would one of those run you?
It depends. It's more of a general term, because you can, if you know what you're doing, you can actually build one with, off the shelf stainless steel parts, as long as it holds pressure. I don't recommend anybody do that, by the way. I wouldn't do that.
Great disclaimer.
Dear God. No, but a small one, let's say, maybe a 1 to 5 pound extractor would be a couple $1,000s.
What about like the high end?
There's a pretty high ceiling. I know of somebody who just bought a system for $300 something thousand, $350,000.
Sounds about right.
Yeah, and you can do that. It's there's a lot to it.
Yeah, well, lab equipment is not cheap.
No, it's not. And now with butane, I would say it does make probably the best extracts pound for pound, because you can preserve terpenes. You can have nice color. There's relatively easy steps for dewaxing. And you also get a really wide variety of consistencies. I don't know if you'd seen the talk I gave at NECAN, but
I didn't. I was distracted downstairs.
That's okay. That was the basis of the talk. There's all these different types of concentrates. There's shatter and caviar or applesauce, and
I haven't heard of that one.
I haven't either. I think I made it up. But it's
what about the live resin?
I think live resin as well is the same thing. I think the live refers to it was made from fresh frozen flour.
Yeah, right. They said something about freeze drying it real quick.
Yeah, they do that, and the terpenes it hasn't been cured yet. I think that's what that means.
It was fantastic. That was some of the nicest shit I ever tried.
Yeah, but you get all these different consistencies, and really, it boils down to more so, is it what crystalline mode is it, and what impurities are present. Wax is a good general term, but if it's crystallized, if it's grainy, it's actually because the THC is crystallized. And if it's sticky, it might have decarboxylated a little bit. It might have more wax present, might have a higher terpene content.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what explains the difference between all these different things.
And I'd like to, if you got another half hour here, I'd like to come do another chunk and dive into some of that stuff.
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay, beautiful. Let's take 5 and we'll be right back. Thanks, Grayson.